Let me do this now. I had to change some settings. The green light is still on. That's a good thing. And yeah, it says I'm live now. Okay, I need to do one more thing. I need to get my button thing working. Button thing, are you working? Yeah. Okay, the button thing is working. I'm working. So here we go. From the kitchen. What? Explain in a minute. From the kitchen in the house on the north side of Cary. Now the kitchen more or less below the bonus room where the studio is. On the north side of Cary. This is a mess. This is the Triangle Talk Show. We are at episode 15. It is June 27th, 2018. I'm Gary Pierce, and this episode is political. The title is German Camp. German camp. What do you mean by that? Well, let me explain the kitchen first. Yeah, I'm in the kitchen. I'm planning on doing a couple of shows on the road. And I wanted to set up sort of a minimalist studio here. This would be a lot easier if I just decided to do this as purely an audio show. But no, even though I don't want you to watch the video, I keep insisting on doing it as a video show. So it took a little more work. So you can't see it, but I'm sitting in front of my laptop. I've got another monitor sitting over here. And the microphone, and got it working on YouTube Live, and got the recording going. We'll make the podcast. And I'm sitting in the kitchen. And well, I had to keep pushing cats away. I finally moved a chair so they couldn't get up here and bug me. If I'm in the kitchen, it's time to feed the cats. German camp. Sounds like someplace you'd go to practice your German a little bit. But no, that's not what I'm going to be talking about here. This morning, well, no, last night, I listened to it this morning. Last night, my very good friend, Rachel Maddow, did her show mostly on the Supreme Court's overturning allowing version 3 of Trump's, I'm going to call it the Muslim ban, just because everybody gets mad at that. You know, it's the travel restriction against a few countries that Trump says we would get people trying to come to the U.S. to cause trouble from. And that may be true. I got to push something in. There's a plug. It's about to fall out. There we go. We would have been off the air. So I don't want to go into the details of it. You've seen it on every news story out there, which countries they are. From the most balanced, the most fair and balanced media that I've seen, this version 3 seems fairly reasonable. I mean, from everything that Trump has said, from the campaign through after he got elected, all of his comments on Muslims, on Mexicans, on anybody who doesn't look like us, you know, doesn't have this white face, this nice American English speech pattern, anybody who isn't like us. And he even used the word culture the other day in and describing what you should be afraid of. Your culture could be overrun. Wow. So version 3 passed muster at the Supreme Court, and although it's getting a lot of heat in most media, except for right-wing media, all the left-wing media is trashing it. The more centered media kind of saying, well, it's at least it's got elements that are making it look like they're trying. But its core, the core is still Trump's racism. So, all that is still in there. On the Rachel Maddow show, she read extensively from the dissent by one of the Supreme Court justices, Sonya Sotomayor. And I'm not going to play the whole thing here because, for one thing, I'd get a takedown. They'd knock me off, but I'll play just a little bit of it here.
But check this out from Sonya Sotomayor today. In case you have not already seen what she said today, and she said it out loud, she read it from the bench, you should know that this is what she said. Quote, "The United States of America is a nation built upon the promise of religious liberty. Our founders honored that core promise by embedding the principle of religious neutrality in the First Amendment. The court's decision today fails to safeguard that fundamental principle. It leaves undisturbed a policy first advertised openly and unequivocally as a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States, because the policy now masquerades behind a facade of national security concerns."
Okay, that's about as much as I feel comfortable putting on the show here, and sticking with fair use, because this is commentary on that. So what she's saying, what Elena Kagan, no, what Sonya Sotomayor is saying is that the travel ban version 3 is national security as a fig leaf for racism. And she spent the first part of that show. This is like, I don't know, 2/3 of the way into the show. 17 minutes in. I'll put a link. This is off the MSNBC website. I don't know if it's on YouTube, but it's about 17 minutes in, or 16 minutes in. I'll put a link on the Triangle Talk Show website, triangletalkshow.com. She spent the first part of that show detailing what happened back in World War II when we rounded up Japanese Americans and put them in internment camps because we were afraid that they would side with the Japanese in an invasion and become sort of an internal, already here, already on the ground force of people that we would have to be fighting. And apparently, without me paying very much attention to it way back in the 80s, somebody unearthed a trove of documentation that, and by the way, that policy was supported by the Supreme Court. One of the Japanese Americans sued and lost in the Supreme Court. We got his name here someplace, but I don't know that I'm going to be able to find it. It was the name of the decision. I should have written this stuff down. I'm going pretty fast to get this studio put together. Nah, I can't find the guy's name. You may hear about that quite a bit too. The Japanese Americans sued, lost to the Supreme Court. The justification was the same as what we're hearing today, national security, as a fig leaf over racism. And so that's what Sonya Sotomayor is saying, not in those words, but that's the sentiment behind it. And that's what Rachel Maddow was talking about. So she spent the first part of the show detailing what happened back in World War II. And where she began was the concept that we had lots of German Americans and lots of Japanese Americans. And we didn't put the Germans into internment camps. And we did put the Japanese in. My mom is German. Her parents are second-generation German immigrants. Her grandparents immigrated from Germany. Late 1800s, I would guess, maybe around the turn of that century. My grandfather was a pastor. I only met him a couple of times when I was very young. I don't really remember. Did a little bit of research. There's not a lot about him online. But the little that I found, he was a pastor. He was something of a firebrand, not we've seen worse. But he did some stem winding, and it was in this was in the I guess the late 20s, early 30s, at a time when there were plenty of people that didn't want America to be fighting. Well, the war hadn't started yet. People didn't want America to be involved in what's going on in Europe, in what's going on with Hitler taking over in Germany and building the Third Reich. And I think my grandfather was kind of beating the drum for Hitler here in America. The war started. America, a lot of people didn't want America to get in. And then, finally we did after Pearl Harbor. And we put Japanese in internment camps, Japanese Americans. And I heard George Takei, the Sulu from Star Wars, Star Trek. Oh, wow. Sulu from Star Trek, George Takei. Pretty liberal guy. On a show, who was he talking to? I think he was he was talking to Brian Stelter on CNN's Reliable Sources. And Brian called them, and I'm trying not to say this myself other than this example, Japanese internment camps. And George said, I would like to correct one thing that you said. They weren't Japanese internment camps. A Japanese internment camp would be an internment camp run by the Japanese. These were internment camps run by Americans and holding Americans. There were no Japanese citizens in the internment camps. Well, I don't know, maybe there were. We may have had Japanese nationals living in the U.S. at the time. They probably would have ended up in the internment camps as well. But for the most part, American citizens, people born here, maybe a couple of generations worth, people with families and businesses. So that is a pretty outrageous story. And one of them sued, got all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, no, national security trumps whatever his claim was. Oh, yeah, I'm a citizen. You're not supposed to just round me up. The Constitution is supposed to prevent that. And some decades later, that got out as a, and if you listen to the Rachel Maddow show, she'll detail it. That got out as, we knew better. It was just a cover for the racist attitude we had about Japanese at the time. And during the war, we kind of encouraged that. But we didn't do it to the Germans. My mom became a captain in the Army. She was stationed in Hawaii. She head nurse at Tripler Hospital during World War II. That's where she met and married my dad. And we didn't talk. She didn't talk a lot about that. She didn't talk a lot about family history. I got very little of it. She was fluent in German. We kids were not encouraged to learn German. I can count to 10, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I can say I love you. Ich liebe dich. I learned from President Kennedy. Ich bin ein Berliner. And I think I just hit the limit of the German that I know. I think. I didn't pick up very much when we were in Berlin last year. That was the first time, not the first time I've been in Germany. I've been in Germany twice, 3 years ago on a cruise down the Rhine River, and then last year, earlier this year, on a quick, long weekend when Cindy had a business conference that took her to Amsterdam. And then she took the train to Berlin, flew me out there, and we spent a long weekend there. There's a video on my, what is the YouTube channel? It's got my ham radio call sign in it. If you want to see some of my vacation videos, youtube.com/KN4AQ and the number 2. That's the channel. You can watch somebody else's home movies. See my trip to Berlin. So we didn't put Germans in there. I mean, we certainly during the war created as much hatred toward Germans as we could and got over it pretty quickly afterwards. Took longer to get over the Japanese because, the Germans, this is German face. This white face is 50% German. And the other half is also pretty European. Now, I haven't done the 23andMe or Ancestry.com to find out what's really in there. I don't really care. But it's pretty European. We didn't put them in internment camps, German camps. There were none. The Japanese part, they didn't look like us. We were more racist about the Japanese than we were about the Germans. So, I recommend that going to listen to the Rachel Maddow show. It's if you don't have on-demand cable and stuff like that, it is on the MSNBC website, and I think it's the whole show. No, it's that segment, 24 minutes long. So that segment of the show. And you can hear her reading Justice Sotomayor's part of the her dissent from the Supreme Court ruling that said, version 3, it's okay, good enough. Oh, they also finally, to the Supreme Court, in sort of a footnote practically, by Chief Justice Roberts, said that ruling that we made back in World War II, never mind. We rescind that. Kagan caught that. No, I keep saying Kagan. Sotomayor caught that too. A lot of people caught that. Oh. So it wasn't okay back in World War II, even though the Supreme Court said it was. And it's okay now for Trump to pretty much base his ban on racism with the fig leaf of national security. That's what seems to be going on. It's not that we have no enemies out there in the world. We do. And some of them are in these countries that they're going to it's not. I guess it's not a complete ban. It's just more scrutiny. So I think that's why the more balanced, the more centered media is saying, yeah, this version 3, it's not just an outright ban. It's just heavier scrutiny, and it's probably okay. The question is what the root is, where it came from. Where it came from is pretty bad. And now, the triangle version of this, or the triangle connection. It's the Supreme Court. I was mentioning this in the last show. It's the Supreme Court. The lasting legacy. There may be a lot of lasting legacies from the Trump administration that we don't see yet. We can see some things get started. There's a lasting legacy from every presidential administration, and if you like the administration, you probably like some of the legacy, and if you don't like them, you probably don't like the legacy. But one of the most lasting legacies, one of the most purely effective legacies of any administration, are the Supreme Court justices they nominate. And we probably would not have had today's ruling or yesterday's ruling go the way it did if Barack Obama had been permitted to appoint Merrick Garland as the justice with 11 months left in his administration. So one of the other things that Rachel Maddow pointed out was that we have a new normal in terms of nominating and approving Supreme Court justices. If she's predicting, if the Democrats somehow take control of the Senate in the midterms in November, they will do their best to hold up any Supreme Court nomination that Donald Trump might try to make. Now, Obama's nomination was in the last year of his term, the last year of the 8 years that he had, and the Republicans were saying that the next president should have the opportunity to fill that Supreme Court vacancy. 11 months is a lot of time left in a term. It wasn't like it was in the lame duck period. We didn't know who was going to be elected. And I think that we didn't fight it harder because no one thought Donald Trump would be elected. Everybody thought that Hillary Clinton had a pretty good lock on getting elected, so didn't fight it that hard. I'm not sure how the fight could have happened because the Republicans had the majority in the Senate, so there's nothing the Democrats could have done other than file lawsuits and try legal maneuvering to force a vote, or other types of political theater and political negotiating and shenanigans. But they didn't try real hard. So, Trump's got 3 more years. If someone retires now, and there's some question, maybe someone's going to retire now. We have some justices that are in their 80s. Maybe they'll decide that they've had enough. Maybe they will have poor health. Maybe one will die. Pretty good chance that Trump is going to have an opportunity to appoint another justice. And that will tip the balance of the court from its current 4-4 with Kennedy as the swing vote. Yeah, swinging a little more conservative than liberal, but the more unpredictable vote. So it is that lasting legacy and something that I don't think people think very hard about when they're considering who it is they want to vote for president. Or whether, as I mentioned in the last show, whether they're going to go vote at all. Because, yeah, okay, we got a nominee. We got Clinton as a nominee. I was a Sanders supporter. Actually, I wasn't. Either one would have been okay. I thought Clinton probably had a better job, or better chance of being elected. And I was surprised to see some polls that seemed to indicate that Sanders might be more electable than Clinton was. I didn't understand those polls. I also thought that the experience that she had, the hit the ground running and just knowing how to do things, would have a better chance of having a successful administration. But I think we would have survived pretty well with Bernie Sanders. If he'd have been the nominee, I would not have been sitting on my hands in November and not going to vote. Would have gone to vote for him. So if you, one thing I really don't want to do is wag my finger. There's the camera. Wag my finger at people who didn't vote last time. Or, maybe even farther, even worse, I guess, voted for Trump because they couldn't handle Clinton. And they thought, well, at least, he's an outsider. He'll get, he'll drain the swamp. Yeah, it's worked pretty well. All right, so the Supreme Court justice aspect to a presidential election, way more important than most people give it credit for, I think. I don't know if you can hear it. I hear cats. They're making all kinds of noise. I can hear it when I'm in the studio upstairs, but it's a lot louder down here. So, you might be interested in. Unfortunately, of course, no cameras in the courtroom. Sotomayor read her dissent out loud from the bench. There'll be audio. There might be audio by the end of the week. We do get Supreme Court audio. It's sometimes interesting to listen to. I haven't listened to very many cases, but I've listened to a few that I was particularly interested in, and kind of wish there was video, but at least get the delayed audio, and can sometimes be kind of interesting. But for now, go and you can read the whole statement online. I'm looking at an NPR website that's got her whole dissent, and it's pretty long. She talked quite a bit. But hearing it read, Maddow does it with some conviction.
Although the majority briefly recounts a few of the statements and background events that form the basis of plaintiff's constitutional challenge, that highly abridged account doesn't even tell half of the story. The full record paints a far more harrowing picture, from which a reasonable observer would readily conclude that the proclamation was motivated by hostility and animus toward the Muslim faith.
Proclamation being one of the things or of the many things that Trump said on the stump in the election and afterwards. A total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until the Congress can figure out what's going on, is what he said. All right, so she reads it, and maybe someday we'll be able to play. If we get the audio of Sotomayor reading her dissent, I can play all of that on the show. That's good old public stuff. All right, something else here. One other thing I wanted to get to. This is kind of outside the triangle, but I'll try to make a triangle connection to it. And I'm not always going to have to make a triangle connection. We can talk about national and international stuff that has its only connection is that we're interested here in the triangle. Up in New York City, and you probably heard this if you've caught the news headlines at all. Up in New York City, in a congressional district that covers Harlem and I think it was the Bronx, I think, there'd been a 10-term incumbent representative. He'd been the representative for that area for 20 years. Joe Crowley in New York's 14th congressional district was upset, got beat in the primary by a 28-year-old Latina running in her first campaign. Her name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She came at him from the left. She is, well, it says here in CNN, an activist and member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Socialists. Yeah, Bernie Sanders, socialist. Socialism. Creeping socialism. We like a little socialism. Little socialism goes a long way. I'm not going to go deeply into her politics. What I am most interested in is the media that she produced. And that, is sort of where we'll tie it to the triangle. Apparently she had a good, what do they call it, a ground game. A lot of people working the district. She got out in the district, met lots of people. She, became well-known in the grassroots, just getting out there, meeting people. And Joe Crowley had sort of, taken his position for granted. He was mostly aiming at taking over from Nancy Pelosi when she finally decided to retire. He won't be doing that because he's lost his seat. So I took a look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I looked at her YouTube site, got that up on the video here, and she's produced a bunch of videos. Most of them haven't gotten very many views, a couple of hundred. A few have broken out. I'm looking at one that's 17,000, 3,000. There's one in Spanish, 28,000. But I think this one that I'm going to look at and play here, and I think I can play hers. I don't think she'll mind. I don't think she's going to come after me. It runs 2 minutes and 258,000 views. And I think this is what a lot of people are pointing to as part of the reason that she broke through. And I'll talk about this media after I played some of it.
Women like me aren't supposed to run for office. I wasn't born to a wealthy or powerful family. Mother from Puerto Rico, dad from the South Bronx. I was born in a place where your zip code determines your destiny. My name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'm an educator, an organizer, a working-class New Yorker. I've worked with expectant mothers, I've waited tables and led classrooms. And going into politics wasn't in the plan. But after 20 years of the same representation, we have to ask, who has New York been changing for? Every day gets harder for working families like mine to get by. The rent gets higher, healthcare covers less, and our income stays the same. It's clear that these changes haven't been for us, and we deserve a champion. It's time to fight for a New York that working families can afford. That's why I'm running for Congress. This race is about people versus money. We've got people, they've got money. It's time we acknowledge that not all Democrats are the same. That a Democrat who takes corporate money, profits off foreclosure, doesn't live here, doesn't send his kids to our schools, doesn't drink our water or breathe our air, cannot possibly represent us. What the Bronx and Queens needs is Medicare for all, tuition-free public college, a federal jobs guarantee, and criminal justice reform. We can do it now. It doesn't take 100 years to do this. It takes political courage. A New York for the many is possible. It's time for one of us. Vote for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on June 26th.
We've got people. They've got money. Okay, so some things about that. 28-year-old first campaign for any office ever. She didn't make that. I mean, she was in it. She made her. She had her part in it, but that was very professionally produced. If you've only listened to the audio, all you heard was her voice, the script, and the music that they chose. The video was, and I'll put a link again. I'll put a link in the Triangle Talk Show. The video was also powerful, but the script was great, impactful, powerful, and not something that she wrote. What she contributed to it, and well, besides getting a good campaign consultant and a good team working with her, was her own presence, her own ability to read a script like that. I've, in my career as a video editor and audio engineer, I have recorded lots of politicians, and a campaign consultant will not try to get their candidate on camera or on mic unless they can do a halfway decent job of it. If their candidate is not a good public speaker, about all you'll ever hear from them is, "This ad paid for by me. I approve this ad." And they'll get professionals or other people that present good media to record or be part of the advertisement. So she does a really good job, at least in that video. And that sort of leads me to kind of wonder. I don't know if this is a worry or just a wonder. And I think this sort of started back with John Kennedy. Is there an advantage in a politician that puts on a really good public face? Because that doesn't necessarily mean that they've got a lot of, that they're really smart, that they will be a really good leader. They may just be a really good actor. You know, Ronald Reagan's our first real pure actor president. You know, the great communicator was the great communicator because he learned how to really be a good actor, and he could have presented any policies and made them sound compelling. And I'm not saying that he didn't believe in what he was saying. I'm saying that he was able to communicate them because he was a good actor, not necessarily a good thinker. Might have been a good thinker. I don't know. Definitely a good actor. And, Barack Obama was not an actor, but he was a good public speaker. There could very well be really good politicians that we're losing out on because they're not good public speakers. They don't present themselves really well, but they can think really well. Well, maybe those people shouldn't be the politician. Maybe they should be staff. I don't know, I guess. we get another view of Alexandria in a debate that she had with Crowley, and I'm just going to play a little bit of that. This is about whether or not Crowley's kids live in their district, and he's sort of wrapping up his argument, and you'll hear from both of them a little bit.
I went to school here. I went to college in New York City. This is my borough. This is my city, and I love it very much.
Well, I just don't think that if a person loves their community, they would choose to raise their family here. They would choose to send their kids to our schools. They would choose to drink our water and breathe our air. And I think that it takes away a fundamental interest and understanding of our communities when we raise our families somewhere else.
Well, on the point, I would say, I was elected by the taxpayers to represent them in Washington, D.C. And that's what I'm doing. When I'm in Washington and working in Washington, I'm there to protect their interests, especially from the onslaught from this president. When it comes to my kids, I'd like to keep my kids out of it. Quite frankly, it's difficult to raise a family as it is. I know that people in my constituency and everywhere, it's very hard to raise a family this year. This job requires me to be away from them for a very long time, and I'm just doing the best that I can.
Okay, so you get an idea what each of them sounds like in a less scripted or an unscripted setting. And she's well-spoken, but she's not doing the script. So why am I presenting this stuff? What's my point? Well, it is that you're going to be seeing lots and lots of media between now and November for the candidates. We've already done our primary here, so we know which candidates we've got going into the election. So in this cycle, and then it's going to get worse in 4 years, or in 2 years rather, when it's a presidential candidate, a governor, one of our senators. It's going to be even more of a madhouse in the media. And I am worried, disappointed, concerned, frantic about how much the media, the commercials, primarily the commercials, affect the way people are going to vote. And I'm saying that from the point of view of someone who has made many of them, been a voice of some of them, been the engineer on many, many more. And I don't like the idea that you can be influenced to vote for one person or another based on the commercials that they put out. The positive commercials usually don't get very much into the details of anyone's policy. No one puts policy in their media. It puts everybody to sleep. The negative commercials are not about policy at all, and as we get closer to an election, you'll see more and more negative commercials and more negative in the negative commercials, because they work, or at least we think that they work. The Trump presidential campaign was an anomaly. He got most of his media for free. He didn't have to run very many commercials. Clinton ran lots of commercials, and the most effective one that I thought, at least the one that I thought was the best, the most powerful one to me, was the one that she ran that was just very legitimate clips of President Trump, candidate Trump, saying things at his rallies, saying the racist and negative and bigoted things that he had tended to say. And of course the pussy tape got in there too. And she ran that just before the election. I assume that it was a Clinton ad. I think so. It could have just been a PAC ad. Not sure, but I think it was a Clinton ad. Because I think what I remember is that she kind of happily endorsed the ad with the disclaimer they all have to put on the end. I approve this message. And obviously it didn't work. I mean, it didn't bring enough people out that were on the fence about voting for her because Bernie didn't get nominated or they didn't like Clinton's or whatever. It was never going to change the mind of a diehard Trump fan. They heard him say all those things. They actually kind of liked them. In essence, it was an ad for Trump for the voters who were going to vote for him anyway. So I don't know where are you going to get the idea of who to vote for if you don't do the commercials? Well, you could watch the debates. They're okay, I suppose. Look on their websites for their deep policy papers. In 1986, I quit my job as a video editor in Chicago. Had a fairly successful editing career going. Wanted to do something else, and I really wanted to take a motorcycle trip around the country. So I did. I quit my job in May 1986, climbed on the motorcycle, and rode border to border up into Canada a little bit. I think I hit probably 46 of the 48 contiguous continental states. Obviously didn't get to Alaska or Hawaii on the motorcycle. Well, people get to Alaska on motorcycles. You can't ride a motorcycle to Hawaii. You can get one there. You can put it on a ship and get it there. You just can't ride there. Even though Hawaii has interstate highways. Got a couple of them in the Honolulu area. And I've never found the ramp that takes you to California would be the most likely place. It'd be a long drive, and there'd have to be a few gas stations along the way, and probably some hotels. So I took that trip, and it was one of Reagan's campaign seasons. There was an election going to be at the end of that trip in November, and I thought, I had not paid very careful attention to the news, to media, the politics. I was, back then, I was a pothead. I was stoned most of the time when I wasn't working. And I was stoned for a good part of that trip. And being an incompetent drug addict, I didn't know where to go buy pot once I was out away from the local people that I knew. So I started drinking a lot more. But also, I wanted to clear my head as much as I could. I had turned down a radio station talk job because I didn't think my head, being fuzzy on pot most of the time and not having paid very much attention to the news, I didn't think I'd be able to take that job because I didn't think I'd be able to do a very good job. And now I'm going to use this trip as a way to pay attention to what's going on, and particularly following the campaign. Well, I learned a bunch of things. I learned about small town newspapers because I grew up with the Chicago Tribune. And the Chicago Tribune back then had bureaus everywhere. They ran some Associated Press stories, but most of the time they ran stories that their own writers wrote. And I got out into the land and found that most newspapers in most of the small towns I was in, no internet, remember, no internet back then, barely cable TV, those newspapers didn't have their own reporters every place. They had a couple of local reporters that did their local stories, and then they ran Associated Press stories for the national stuff. We're kind of like that here. The News and Observer doesn't have Washington Bureau reporters. McClatchy does, and McClatchy owns the News and Observer and the Charlotte Observer and a bunch of other papers. So you will see what are essentially wire service reports from McClatchy reporters, but you'll see more Associated Press. Most of the national stories are coming from the Associated Press. And so that's what I saw out there. What I learned about what was in the papers was that 98% of the stories were about the horse race, the process. And I kept looking for, well, where are the stories about the policies? Where are the stories about what's important? What's going to lead me to decide who to vote for? Pretty sure I knew who I was going to vote for. I wasn't going to be voting for Reagan, but I wanted to at least understand what those stories were. And, well, they had the drumbeat story of the day or the week, a little bit about what the candidate wanted to beat on. And if you're wondering how that works, go watch The West Wing. The candidates are always trying to come up with their story of the day or the week, and the reporters don't want to report that. They want the more exciting horse race story. And, you know, who's leading, who's in the polls, who's come up with the best quip or slogan, who's got the best gotcha. But the actual details of what it is you're going to be voting on, nobody cares. Nobody's excited about that. So we're still there. As we approach the election coming up, you're not going to hear a lot about the details about what any candidate really would do if they were in office, because it's kind of drudgery and it's kind of my eyes glaze over. You'll get the bashing of the other candidate. You'll get a few hot button points, whatever they think is going to get them your attention today, which is not what they're going to be focusing on for the 2 or 4 years. Cindy's back. But it's that's what you're going to be hearing. And as looking at the story from New York, just to see what kind of media she was producing, and she produced some pretty slick media. And you're going to be seeing some pretty slick media being produced here too. But she did a great job for a first-timer, 28 years old. I don't know if her media is what pushed her across the line. I do know that it helped. And it could have. It could have pushed her across the line. All right, Cindy and I are going to go to dinner. I'm going to say goodbye. And let's see you from someplace else maybe if this thing seems to work. I'm Gary Pierce. This is German camp. Auf Wiedersehen. No, I screwed that one up pretty. Auf Wiedersehen. My mom never taught me any German. Bye-bye.